Yeah, a difficult situation quite after these talks and sunshine outside. So I'm just going to build some arguments which were already announced. And the big question for me, and what I would like to share with you today, is probably a very simple question. And it was already mentioned. Why should corporations invest into communication at all? And why should they spend money or resources on content strategy? As content strategists, you might have many arguments, but the main question is, are these arguments understandable for someone who is on a higher level of communications or even not in communications at all? I would like, as an academic, probably not talk so much about fancy stories and things, which are very instructive, but I would like to show you some empirical insights about corporate communications in Europe and Germany especially, which might give us a glance, a picture of what's going on and how to integrate our topic of content strategy into a larger topic of corporate communications. And then I would like, and that's the main message, and in a probably very simple picture again, which shows you how corporate communications from a strategic point of view can be described. So what's about the framing and the storytelling on our own business? And I think there's a lot to do about that, not only shaping content and managing content for clients, for corporations, but also thinking of the content and the strategy of presenting corporate communications and content strategy itself. So the simple question is, why should a corporation invest into communication and content? And you will have many answers for that. Strategic communication, if it's not just communication on its own, because it's so nice to communicate and to visualize thoughts and to make it all interesting for audiences, it's all costing money and resources. So in the end, strategic communication should be aligned or should be linked to strategic goals of a specific organization. Looks simple, obviously it isn't, because there's a lot of storytelling about that, and corporations are not rational, as we all know, but at least there's a story of being rational, so probably content strategists also should have or tell a story about being rational. And the main question is obviously not just communicating, but communicating with whom, how, and how much, because it costs money. So the story of integrating and being more efficient is nice, but the main question is, why communicate at all? And to which specific end? So the end is normally not just presenting nice content and attracting a lot of users, but the question is, would you like to attract consumers? Would you like to attract new employees? Would you like to impress politicians because you're trying to invest in some Asian markets and you would like to have your blueprint in the public opinion over there? And who shall take care? That's one more operational question about so many people are communicating. Probably a lot of people are communicating on behalf of your organization whom you don't see and know that they are communicating. And why produce content, which is a question here, if you are not a media company, even if many people tell you that nowadays every company is a media company. No, you're not a media company. Your business is selling cars or services or gasoline or whatever. So why and how much should you specialize on content? And probably it's not communication at all, because you can simply use the same money and lower your prices or invest into new products or whatever. So you see, that's a very simple question, but I think it's necessary to think about these issues because communication in the end costs money, and it costs money every year. Unfortunately, most results, and that's most storytelling communication people do nowadays, is about brands, it's about image and reputation. And unfortunately, these are long-term and immaterial assets you build up, and these don't show up in your balance sheets. And that's a big difference if you use your money for communication or if you use your money for innovation, for new products. So it's a very basic question, probably a very simple question, but in the end, I believe in our studies and our projects with heads of communication of international companies based in Europe show that this is exactly the main question if some new ideas and some new fields like content strategy, and that's what we're talking about today, are coming up, asking for resources, asking for refiguring your communication strategies. So if you look at the big picture, and it's not about details here, just to show you that a lot of discussion we see also in this community of content managers and content strategy is about the communication environment. What's going on, what's about the audiences, what's about the platforms, how to integrate that. And that's totally okay, that's very important, and you're specialized in that. Unfortunately, at the same time, there's a business environment, and we've heard about that from Eric. He told us that the business environment is very problematic. Probably it's not so in Germany at the moment. It's a very flourishing business environment. It can be different cultures and countries. Asia is also quite good at the moment. But at the same time, we have a pressure on existing business models. We have stronger regulation influenced by authorities. These are the real questions. Can we help companies to work on that with content management? Probably we can. But it's a different argument to show how we can help and work on regulation issues if we want to enter the Asian market, than how to be more efficient internally if we run a lot of channels and platforms and work on that. Both are important, but there are different arguments behind that. So if you look at something like that, and that's something like a picture which probably a CEO would ask his head of communication, and there are a lot of projects going on in communication, and you have to argue what is the big thing for next year, where would I like to spend my resources, then we need some answers. And obviously answers can be very complex, and don't worry, my answer is not too complex, but it's also not too easy. And the wrong answer, from my point of view, would be to look like many did in the last weeks. You all know about this leaked report of innovation from the New York Times, and we had a lot of comments about that, a lot of agencies, people commenting. Just look at the New York Times innovation report, and that's the Bible for you as content marketers. And if you read about that, 7 lessons every company can learn from the leaked New York Times digital strategy document, yeah, every company is a media company, blah, blah, blah. Nice, okay. But that's not the real story, because Mercedes and Bosch and BASF are no media companies. Their business model is different. But obviously, the communication environment is very influential for them and for their business model. But it's not simply thinking in the same terms like media companies do. That was only the communication part, and then you can learn about that. So what we have to do is to look more specifically at not only business models, but at the, let's say, way how large corporations nowadays are organized and work on communication. And how do they do that? Quite simply, they organize the communication function. And they think that only the communication functions and communication people communicate, which is obviously not true. But that is how they think and how they allocate budgets. And that means what we did and do constantly is we, and some of you might know these stories who are from Germany or Europe, we monitor across Europe since many years, once a year, what communication executives think, what they're doing. So this is a study, this new one, European Communication Monitor 2014 will be released next week in Brussels. We have about 2,500 respondents every year. And so that's a big picture of what's going on in communication departments of organizations, especially of companies. And what we also did last year, and I think that's very important, is not from, let's say, storytelling, but just to do some empirical research about that. We asked really CEOs and board members only of large companies in Germany, what are their expectations of communication? Are they interested in digital? Have they heard about content marketing? Have they heard about, or do they think simply of press releases all the time? And digital is not new at all. And if you compare those both views, probably we get some insights what's really going on. And just to give you a short glance to support my argument, which will come the next step, we see, and probably you have felt that if you're working in the business, that obviously these communication people which were interviewed here, communication executives, all very experienced people, but also the CEOs told us that communication has risen in importance during the last years. Last month, for the CEOs, we asked about the last 5 years. It's more important, that's clear. Everybody has understood that. That's not a new message. But unfortunately, the influence and the status, and especially the budgets of communication departments have not risen at all, and always compared to other functions. So we're not talking about, different years where we have in Spain or in Italy, obviously different economic situations than in Germany. So how can we explain that? Because everybody's talking about communication, and if nobody believes in communication, it doesn't really make sense to talk in detail about doing a better communication by doing content strategy. The main reason why, if we ask the communication executives, is that top management doesn't understand us. It's always nice stories blaming the others. It's true, we can show that, but it's not a solution. The second question, 3 out of 4 told us that it's our own fault. We can't explain what we're doing. So our own storytelling, our story is not good enough. And I think that's the main reason I'm talking about here today. We as communication professionals, or you as communication people, are probably not as good and as consistent as other people in company settings of explaining what you're doing. Probably because the communication world is changing so much, but probably it's not really changing so much. Probably we are inventing too many new ideas and too many new buzzwords all the time. So how can someone who is not a communicator understand and trust us? And obviously, and Eric talked about that before, we are using business phrases like ROI all the time. ROI of social media, of content strategy. It's nonsense, because ROI is something different. And everybody who understands ROI will simply not trust us, not because we're doing a bad work, but because we're using phrases which we obviously don't understand. And that's not good. If someone should trust us in the field of communication and content strategy, where those people don't know about. So these empirical data prove that there's a problem, obviously, which is on a, let's say, more basic level. And if you haven't solved that problem, it's difficult to work on those not only pragmatic, but very important issues of how to deliver content nowadays in an online world. So if we are, and we have asked these CEOs and board members, and these are really only CEOs or board members on the top level of large German corporations in different industries. And what shows up here is another problem. You all know about that everybody can communicate or thinks he or she can communicate. So only two-thirds, 66%, believe that the professional corporate communication function is very important or important for success of a company, but 88% think that their own personal communication is more important. So what does it mean? It doesn't mean that the trust into the professional communication departments and agencies is not strong enough. So how can we raise that? By inventing new words, new stories, what we're doing every day? No, probably not. Probably by going back and telling simpler stories and integrating topics like content strategy into these frameworks. Reasons why? Why is this situation? And we have similar data from other countries like the US. We don't have data about that from Asia until now. But the situation in the US is not better at all, even a bit worse. The reason why is because probably business models are a bit different. If we ask again, And that is data from also the European study. Who are important gatekeepers for organizations? And we asked very important, very experienced executives in communications. You see that only half of them across Europe, and there are differences obviously across industries and across different European countries, only half of them say that employees who are active on the web and consumers who raise their voice on the social web are important. Does it mean that the rest hasn't understood? I don't know. It's a quantitative study. But based on qualitative projects we run, we see no, they have understood, but a lot of companies are working in markets where indeed consumers who raise their voice on the social web are not important. We talk about these crisis situations, but many large B2B companies are living in market environments where consumers and what's happening on the web doesn't really matter. And we always can say, yeah, but it will be important in 10 years. I'm not sure about that. It will be important for employer branding, but probably not if you're selling some infrastructure in the energy market or something like that, and you have 3 large companies in the whole world. So if you rely on that, probably you see that it is important, but it's not important in the same sense for everybody. And obviously, it doesn't mean that everybody has developed strategies, so there's a gap where we can work on. But the gap is not to 100%, because there might be some organizations who are not in that field and where communication is not the main driver for success. And if we look at and here's again, I'm switching a bit between the two perspectives. Here's again data from the CEOs and board members' view. If we ask them, what is relevance from your top point of view for corporate success? It is more internal communication, marketing communications, or communication with very broad stakeholder groups in society. And what is the actual performance? It's quite interesting that we see that the actual performance is the best in the field of marketing and financial communications. That's a very established field. But the most important from the top management point of view is internal communications. That's good for all of you who work in that field and who focus on that. But unfortunately, a lot of stories and a lot of framing we do ourselves in communication is about external communication, about crisis, about all these nice stories, and we try to build our way to the top based on these stories. Yeah, probably that's not the right story, how to enter the boardroom. So you see, many of these empirical data, and that's the last of them, that's a picture of the study which we released next week. And it's quite interesting because that's a longitudinal survey from 2008 until 2014. So we're talking about 7 years now. And each year across Europe, we asked for the top issues on the mind of the communication executives. And that's, we also had agencies, but we're now focusing only on the corporations. And what you see here is that the topic of the digital evolution and social web, it was very strong 3 or 4 years ago. CSR was very strong until 2010. It's not top priority until now. It doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean there's no money in it. Probably there's more money in it, like in press relations, which doesn't show up here. It's business as usual nowadays. But the only topic, the blue one, which is really important all the time, and that's the unsolved issue, I would explain, is how do we link communication to business goals? And that's what I'm talking about here. And that's interesting. Why is the whole communication industry and as professionals working on all different topics, CSR, digital, whatever, and they all solve these problems, they're getting better in that, but they're not solving the main issue, the main problem. How do we tell our own story? How do we link ourselves, and it will be changing what communication is about, how do we link that to organizational goals? And now, the big picture, And probably the solution, or not a solution, it's just an idea to think about, is very simple. It's the idea of not having, let's say, 100 different stories, what communication does, and not a too simple story. Communication just builds reputation, or communication helps you to solve crisis. But to build, let's say, a middle framework of talking about 3 or 4 different routes, how communication can help to foster organizational goals. And then link what you're doing, for example, content strategy, a content strategy, or plan or investment, to that. And ask for every project, what are we doing here? Are we looking to prevent crisis? Are we looking to monitor the environment to get good ideas and build into innovation, which is a goal on itself? Or are we selling products? That's something different. And I think this is exactly what's missing nowadays. It's a very simple scheme of understanding that communication is always two-sided. Communication is about outbound, about speaking out, and it's about listening, inbound. And we have that in social media. We do social media monitoring, and we speak out. We share conversations, we manage conversations, we align our themes. At the same time, communication can be or can have effects in a short term. You want to influence consumer preferences, and then you can measure, obviously, whether your e-commerce platform or your whatever sales go up. But probably you build up brand's reputation or internally organizational culture. That's a different goal. You might have same concepts and strategies behind that, but your goal is different. So you have to sell it and measure it and calculate it differently from a corporate perspective. At the same time, if you're working in issues management, if you would like to identify opportunities, if you work in content management by not only looking for interesting topics and themes to use them for your own content, but to listen what's going on, to tell that to other people in the company who are probably working in the field of customer insight, of innovation, that's a different goal. You're not monitoring because you want to do your own work better, but you want to help others to do their work better. A totally different relationship of communication and content work to business goals. And if you want to manage relationships, which is a main goal from my point of view of content management and content strategy, because you're building up landscapes and you integrate yourselves in communities in discussions, then the main goal is to foster relationships. And you can use these relationships probably later for different other goals. But that means your story and also your measurement should be different. So in the end, you can work on that, and I did work on that quite practically, by simply asking for every project, please tell me one of these 4 or 5, you can invent 1 or 2 more stories, of how you reach corporate goals. And that means, coming to an end, that this is a very rational perspective, because you can explain what's going on and can put that in a plan and argue for that. Unfortunately, that's only one part of the game, because we have nowadays a lot of other people, employees, talking and listening to consumers, not only on the web, also to other stakeholders, and how to integrate them into such a model, because telling them, please tell me what you're doing when you're communicating, is very difficult. That's the next step, obviously. And then, obviously, it's about speaking and listening. So nowadays in content strategy, from my observation, we're talking about the question how to integrate and how to speak out. But what's about listening? And do we have strategies of listening? And a colleague of mine from Sydney, Jim McNamara, he phrased this term architectures of listening, which I really like. Because we are talking about integrated communications and whatever in a sense of speaking out. But do we have architectures of listening? I'm not talking about monitoring tools, which are great, but I'm talking about that and combining that with the knowledge our employees, we ourselves have, not only from the digital world, but we have a lot of live communication, trade fairs, we connect a lot of information there, but do we use that not only for our own content, what we produce, but do we use this insight to give it to other corporate functions? And the output of that and the return might be much, much higher than the return you can ever calculate based on who's looking at your website or attending your magazines. So to close with that, to be able to meet this challenge requires, from my point of view, and we're discussing that with a lot of CorpCom guys who have understood that, but it's difficult to change organizations, obviously. It takes time. That communicators move their focus from leading communication functions and departments and agencies to help them and consultants to more broadly develop the organization's communication skills on a broader level. And that's a much broader agenda, which is probably not very practical and pragmatic for the next months over here. That's probably a problem we are working on in academia with our students and for the next generation. But I think to understand this broad picture might help you to figure out where content strategy can really develop value. And that's a broader picture, probably not too broad, but hopefully kind of storytelling that helps you to figure out where content strategy really can help. Thank you very much.